Co-ops have strict requirements for how much you can put down in cash and how much you are allowed to finance, how large of a mortgage you're allowed to take out. They tend to be strict. Hello and welcome back to Real Estate Investing in New York with me, Christina. In this episode, I am going to blow your mind because the co-op math ain't mathing. Co-ops are the more affordable product versus condos. This is what we're told. Co-ops are more affordable, but are they really? Stay tuned. We're covering everything here. This is Real Estate Investing in New York with Christina, helping you achieve a future of financial success by making intelligent real estate investment decisions today. Welcome back. This episode is an interesting one. Even if you're a real estate agent and you listen to this podcast or YouTube series regularly, this episode is eye-opening. And it has to do with the fact that co-ops are known for being the more affordable property type in New York as opposed to condos. Co-ops are often priced lower than condos are, and it's because they are more strict. There are less buyers that can buy them. They have much more stringent financial criteria to purchase. So what does that mean for you as a buyer as you are weighing the pros and cons of condos and co-ops? I'm going to run the numbers for you, and we're going to see which one is really more affordable. We are going to take a very simple and straightforward price point as an example here, and we are going to use fairly easy numbers to work through because I know you guys don't have paper and pens in front of you. You're listening, so we're going to make it simple, and we will use a property purchase price of $1 million for a co-op. Doesn't matter what that gets you, how big the apartment is. It doesn't matter for this specific example this exercise that we are going through on this show today. So we are using a co-op property of $1 million. Now we are going to compare it directly to a condo property that is the same as the co-op property. We know that condo properties are more expensive than co-ops. So for the sake of this example, I want you to be able to compare two properties that are similar, as exactly similar as we can achieve. So for the condo purchase price, I am going to set that at $1.25 million. I'm going to add $250,000, 25% to the price that we set for the co-op. And I'm going to say that this equivalent condo is $1,250,000 to purchase. Sounds steep, right? Just wait. Both properties, the condo and the co-op, will have monthlies of $2,000 a month. This is very likely, very reasonable. Condos have separate payments that are made for taxes, property tax, and common charges, which is essentially maintenance. And co-ops have one overall maintenance fee, which includes your property taxes. Everyone thinks that maintenance fees are higher in co-ops, but that is because the number that they're seeing includes your property tax number. Of course, every building is different. Things will range, but for the sake of the example, we will use $2,000 a month for both the carrying costs, maintenance, and property taxes for the co-op as well as the condo. Neither property type is known for having higher or lower monthlies than the other. And we are going to be financing this property purchase, so you'll be taking out a mortgage in this example. And for the sake of keeping things even, we are going to use, for this exercise, an interest rate of 6% on your mortgage for both scenarios. Let's look first at your down payment. How much money do you need to purchase these two properties? Co-ops have strict requirements for how much you can put down in cash and how much you are allowed to finance, how large of a mortgage you're allowed to take out. They tend to be strict. Co-ops can restrict the percentage that you are allowed to finance. They do not like excessive loan to value ratios, meaning they do not allow you to finance more than 80% of your purchase price. Many co-ops will restrict you from even financing up to 80%. They will force you, their policies might dictate that you can only finance 50% or 60% or 70% or none at all. of your purchase price. So co-ops are strict. That's the main message there. But for the sake of this example, let's use a co-op that does allow you to finance up to 80% of your purchase price. That is the maximum percentage that you would ever expect to be able to finance when buying a co-op. So that is the percentage that we will use here. Now for the condo is a more flexible product with more flexible policies. Most will allow you to finance up to 90% of your purchase price. So for these two scenarios, your cash down payment for the co-op is going to be 20% of your purchase price, and your cash down payment for the condo is going to be 10% of your purchase price. The dollar amounts for each of those are, for the condo, you will be putting down 10%, which is $125,000 of the full price that we mentioned earlier. Alternatively, for the co-op, you're going to be putting down 20% of $1 million, which is $200,000. So right off the bat, you are required, even though the purchase price for the co-op is smaller than the purchase price of the condo, you are already required to have a larger cash down payment to buy the cheaper co-op. Next, we're going to talk about the debt to income ratio that will be required to purchase both of these properties. The debt to income ratio, to define this for you quickly, is the total amount of debts that you have monthly, meaning your proposed apartment mortgage payment, your property tax payment, and your maintenance payment, along with any other personal loans that you make monthly, like auto loan payments, student loan payments, personal loans, etc. We're not counting those additional for the sake of this exercise, but you would take your total debts and you divide that number by your total monthly income before tax. And that percent that you get is your debt to income ratio. Co-ops are more strict on this ratio, and they want to see that you have a debt to income ratio of 26%, and it's usually not very flexible. Sometimes we can stretch it to 27% or 28%, as far as you could potentially have up to 28% of your monthly income going towards expenses. But you do get into shaky waters when it comes to co-op approval when you push it that far. So for the sake of this example, we should use 26% debt to income ratio for your guideline for the co-op product. And for condos, there is no strict requirement for debt to income ratio. So what we are going to use is the debt to income ratio that you would be required to have if you were taking out a traditional loan with a standard bank. We're using a pretty conservative number here, and that number will be 40% debt to income ratio. A bank will approve you for a mortgage loan if your debt to income ratio is higher than that, higher than 40%, most likely too. Many banks are more flexible, but I don't want, for the sake of the example, I don't want to use overly reckless numbers, or, I don't want to go either way in one direction or another to like sway the results of this exercise. I want to use the standard, fairly conservative numbers. And with condo products, if you are able to obtain a pre-approval letter for the purchase, usually that is enough to satisfy the requirements of the condo. So if your debt to income ratio is what the bank was willing to approve, you are usually fine. So there is no reason to make that number much more constricted or conservative than the number that we provided. So in order to calculate that, we first need to understand what the monthly obligations are going to be for the condo product as well as the co-op product. So starting with the condo, using the numbers that we have already mentioned, to finance 90% of a $1,250,000 property, your total monthly debt obligation to that apartment between your mortgage payment and your tax and maintenance amounts is going to total $8,750 On average. This is slightly rounding so that we can keep the numbers fairly simple, though they are not rounded numbers in a way to prove a point one way or another. So figure $8,750. Now, if $8,750 can be your total expenses monthly, and that number cannot exceed 40% of your monthly income, then that gives you the equivalent of an annual income requirement of $262,500. So that is your annual income requirement to purchase the condo. Now moving on to the co-op, the less expensive purchase price of $1 million, and to finance 80% of that apartment, the sum of your maintenance, which includes taxes, and your mortgage payment is going to equal around $6,800 monthly. Now, if $6,800 monthly is your total debts, then in order to obtain a 26% debt to income ratio, that means that your minimum income requirement to be approved in this building is $291,428 a year. So we're already seeing that you need to earn more money annually to purchase this co-op, even though it's less expensive, than you do to purchase this condo. So now let's move on to post-closing liquidity. Post-closing liquidity is a requirement in all co-op buildings. It requires the purchaser to have funds in excess of what it is going to cost to close on that property. So once you take out of your bank account your down payment and your closing costs, you are left with some money left over, and that money is called your post-closing liquidity. Co-ops have very specific post-closing liquidity requirements. Usually, the minimum amount of required post-closing cash you can have that they will accept is 24 months worth of apartment carrying costs, meaning your mortgage, your taxes, and maintenance, which is all that rolled up $2,000 monthly amount in addition to your mortgage. So that is the dollar amount that the co-ops are looking for in order to approve you. So I'm going to break that all down. In the exercise that we are using, we have monthly carrying costs of $2,000 plus your mortgage payment. So in this example, if the co-op is requiring you to have 24 months worth of post-closing liquidity, it means that you have to have an additional $163,200 in your bank account in liquid cash after your down payment and closing costs are removed from your account. This cannot be a investment account. Usually they do not want to see stocks equivalent to this value. The co-ops do not want to see 401ks equivalent to this value because those are separate savings accounts used for different things, and stocks can be volatile as well. So for that reason, the co-op wants your post-closing liquidity to be straight cash, liquid, easy to tap into. So you need that much extra money in your account than you do to buy a condo. The condo does not have specific post-closing liquidity requirements. They will look at your application overall, and if you have solid employment with a bit of a track record in terms of how many years you've been employed, then you should not be experiencing strict requirements for post-closing liquidity in most co-op buildings. Now for closing costs. This is an important part of the equation to understand how much money you really need on hand to purchase both of these products, respectively. The first thing you need to calculate are your closing costs in order to figure out how much money you'll have left over and how much cash you need on hand. So the closing costs for co-ops are less expensive than the condo. It's one thing that actually works in favor of the co-op. You don't pay mortgage tax when you are paying your closing costs on a co-op. You do pay mortgage tax on a condo. And this is a significant part of your closing costs because your mortgage tax is about 2% of your loan amount. So that can get expensive. I like to assume, as a conservative estimate, closing costs for a condo being about 5% of your overall purchase price. And for the co-ops, since you're not paying mortgage tax, I like to assume conservatively that your closing costs would be around 3% of your purchase price. For the sake of this example, that is what you can assume. We're overestimating a bit on the co-op side, but it's okay because I want to do that just to show how these numbers work out even more so. So when we calculate that out, if we estimate 5% of the purchase price for the condo closing costs, we get $62,500 for condo closing costs. And alternatively, for the co-op, we're looking at 3% of the purchase price, and that gets us $30,000 for co-op closing costs. So as you can see, you need over $30,000 more dollars in closing costs for the condo product versus the co-op. So in this case, the co-op wins on affordability there. However, let's summarize our findings. Let's see what those numbers look like stacked up together. The co-op actually requires a purchaser to earn $29,000 more income annually. In this specific example, you would need to earn $29,000 more annually to afford a co-op versus an exactly similar condo product that's actually priced higher. And as far as the amount of total cash on hand needed to make those purchases, given the down payment requirements and the debt to income ratio requirements, your total cash requirement to buy the co-op that you must have on hand is $393,200. The condo, on the other hand, is only $187,500 that you need in order to be approved for that purchase. That's a difference of $205,000. A little bit higher, but we're rounding. $205,000 you need in cash on hand to buy the co-op product versus the condo. That's a lot more money for a $1 million price point that we're talking about. So in summary, you need 200 grand more to buy the co-op to be approved in the building, and you need to earn $30,000 more dollars annually. Now I ask you, is the co-op product really the more affordable product? You are paying more money technically for the condo, but you need to have all of that money in order to be approved for the co-op. So usually people are deterred from the condo product because they don't want to increase their budget enough to be able to afford it, because condos can be 25%, sometimes a little bit more expensive than co-op products. However, even though they're looking at a quote more affordable product being the co-op, and maybe they're seeing smaller purchase price dollar amounts, they actually will need to come up with more money in their bank accounts and in their annual income in order to buy that property. So of course, everything is balance, and buying the ideal real estate asset for you is very personal. But I would love to ask you, which product would you choose after hearing these numbers? I look forward to hearing your responses. Put a comment in if you're watching the YouTube video, and if you are on podcast, reach out to me and let me know what you thought about this. Were you surprised? Did you already know this? I'd love to hear your feedback. You can always get in touch with me after listening to any of my episodes. I love hearing from you guys. My email address is christina.cremidas@elliman.com. You can also visit my website, christinacremidas.com, to learn more about myself and my team and see all of my contact info there. And finally, please follow along on Instagram and TikTok. You see a lot more sides of the business, and you see personal things and work things all added up together on Instagram and TikTok. So it's definitely worth following. My handles on both of those apps are christina.cremidas. Thank you so much for being here, and stay tuned for the next one.